Thank you all for coming out on this, what started as such a dreary day. My name is Philia Cushing, and I'm the president of the board of the Manchester Museum. And it's my pleasure to welcome everybody. I'm going to start, I was asked to say 2 housekeeping things. If you could please turn your cell phones off, that would be great. And the powder rooms are right down the hall. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. Okay. So, welcome, thank you for being here. After this evening's program, we're going to invite you to join us for the opening of our new summer exhibit. We'll go right across the street to the museum for the opening of Summers by the Sea, Masconomo House, Hotel, and the resort era. We'll also be serving desserts at the museum with a nod to tonight's lecture. Some of the dessert offerings were inspired by menus from the Masconomo House Hotel. So I'd like to make a few announcements. I want to, of course, thank our fabulous speakers committees. Our talks have been really popular. They have sold out quickly. Big thanks to Mary Minot, Allison Ann Holt-White, Marianne Coons, and Russ Brown. Yes, applause. I also want to thank our Speaker Series sponsor, Santander Bank. Is Kathy? Kathy? No? Kathy is the manager across the street. We love Kathy. I also want to thank Utopia Farms for their generous contribution to our museum garden. Not only did they donate flowers, they came and planted our planters, so that's really amazing. So please go and support Utopia. Thanks to Nancy Clivert for all her hard work, and to the parish for letting us host this event in their beautiful space. I especially want to thank the people who created our Summers by the Sea exhibit. This was done entirely in-house, which is incredibly impressive. Okay, so make sure you cross the street. I'll remind you about 4 more times tonight. So our thanks go to Becca Campbell, Sue Thompson, Chris Burden, Steve Rosenthal, Matthew Swindell, and Matt Genta. Really fantastic work, everybody. So please mark your calendars, because our next event is on Wednesday, June 26th. And if you haven't done so already, please purchase your tickets online. If this causes any confusion, just call the museum. We're happy to help you through the process. This is a very special event to be held at the beautiful Sharp's Mouth Estate. Proceeds from this event will help support future speaker events, exhibits, and programs. The event is going to start at 6 for a full hour of cocktails and refreshments, and at 7, Arthur Shercliffe will begin his talk, which is entitled Sharp's Mouth, A Brief History of the Longfellow, Dana, and Curtis Families in 19th Century Manchester. Arthur is a direct descendant of the original Curtis family, and he will provide an intimate account of this fascinating Manchester family. So please register, and again, if you're confused, just call us. We'd love to sign you up. Okay? So just a little bit more about us. We continue to accomplish a great deal at the museum. We recently completed conservation work on several important objects in our collection. We held several children's programs at the museum, and we finished installing UV protection on our museum windows to help safeguard our collection and objects from damage. We were also able to accomplish all this thanks to your generosity. Please consider giving to our bicentennial capital campaign. It's easy, just go on our website. For those who have already donated, thank you so much for your support. Now I'm going to go off script for a moment. Some things in life aren't always under our control. No, this is not bad, don't worry. I see Stephanie looking concerned. Corey could not be here tonight. So he's asked me to read something that he wanted us to share with all of you. So I want to thank the Manchester by the Sea Museum and the First Parish Community Hall for the opportunity to speak about the summer resort era. Unfortunately, due to a recent minor medical emergency, I am unable to attend tonight's event. Luckily, you're in the very capable hands of Matthew Swindell, who I promise will share an equally entertaining and illuminating presentation about this historic and special era in the town's history. Collaborating with the museum on this presentation has been a special experience, and through our research, I've begun work on a new timeline documentary about tonight's subject that will be completed this summer. I can't wait for the chance to share these stories with you at a future Speaker Series event and fulfill my obligation. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening and enjoys the unveiling of the summer exhibit at the museum. Thank you for understanding Cory Kokoru. Okay, but following that, where's my last page? I have some wonderful news, and that Matthew Swindell, who I know many of you know, has been just appointed by our board, our new Associate Director of the museum. So enough from me. I'm going to go sit down, and I'm going to turn this over to Matthew, who is going to run the show tonight.
Thank you, Philio. My name is Matthew Swindell, and I think I probably know a good amount of you here already from our past lectures or coming over to the Trask House. And I'm very pleased to be the new Associate Director of the museum. I've been with the museum for over 2 years now, and I've really gotten a sense of the community here, of the people within the museum, and in the town of Manchester-by-the-Sea. So I'm very pleased to be here. And pleased to be here tonight presenting on Summers by the Sea, Masconomo House, and the resort era. I know many of you were expecting Cory Kokoru, and I wish he was here. We are expecting he will be with us at a future event, so stay tuned with the museum. And we do have a special guest here, who I'm going to announce his name later in the program, who's going to be able to give you an inside look to the Masconomo House building. Now, I'd also like to acknowledge the thanks to some of our volunteers for helping with this, this exhibit, along with our fabulous curatorial team. Let's have a round of applause again for them. M. Chikala, who I believe is here. I saw M here. Where are you, M? There you are. A round of applause for M, who volunteered at American University, who's helping us in this summer. And also Libby Mullery, who was a SCORE intern from Manchester, Essex, who helped put together the presentation, along with them, over at the museum. You'll see after this presentation. So, without further ado, I'm going to get to some of history. So the summer resort era here in Manchester, really the core of it, though I'd say Manchester still remains quite a popular summer resort. So the summer resort era of the grand hotels and the opulent summer cottages really has its core in the 19th century and the early 20th century. And Manchester, on the eve of the summer resort era, was not so much a pleasure resort, but a mill town, because this town during the early to mid-19th century was home to about 43 different furniture shops. And then the harbor was pretty much a working harbor. You had businesses along there. There was Knight's Wharf. You can see the stables there. You can see the ship there. And eventually it had to be dredged. The old-time residents remembered it being deeper than it was in sort of the mid-19th century, late 19th century. Though by the time it was dredged, by the 1890s, pleasure craft was rising as a new need for the harbor to be clear. And so the phenomenon of a summer resort in, let's say, United States really began in the 19th century. You did actually have, going back to pre-colonial days, the indigenous people here summered in Manchester. They grew corn, they lived here. But for Americans of European descent, it really didn't start till the 19th century, when you did have industry, you had factories, and you had capitalists who were gaining wealth in the cities, but wanted to, well, be able to sort of escape to the rustic countryside. You think this country was urbanizing in the 19th century. You had factories with smoke. You had a lot of new immigration. The cities were swelling. And for people who had the means to try to leave the city, they took whatever avenues they could get. For more modest means, perhaps that meant taking a streetcar to a suburb. But to those who had even more means to have a house of their own way in the country, a place like Manchester was a very viable place for that. And what brought people to Manchester was the train, which came in the 1840s. It was August 1847 that the railroad opened here in Manchester. And around that time is when the first summer resident came to Manchester, the first one, Richard Henry Dana. And the railroad was a very powerful force for this town as a summer resort. During the whole period of the Gilded Age, Progressive Era, the core of what we consider the summer resort era, the railroad was the primary means of travel. Used by, I'd say, from lower to upper class, though it was not necessarily affordable transportation for everyday use, particularly for the lower classes. So it catered, actually, I'd say, more to upper class use. There was actually a special train for the people who had their summer houses up here. The tractors, they called it the dude train. That was known as the Flying Fisherman, an express train, $100 a season. Went to the stops on the shore, and I think it went express up to, I think, Montserrat. And then you had Pride's Crossing, Beverly Farms, West Manchester, Manchester, Magnolia, towards West Manchester, Gloucester, Rockport. Places where people had their summer houses. And so you had the wealthy investing in this public transportation and making it very relevant for Manchester. So when Manchester got the train, summer residents came, and they were interested in the natural beauty of this town. And I always like to say sort of one man's trash, another man's treasure in the case of Manchester, because you had farmers who owned the land along the shore. They were tilling the rocky soil that their ancestors tilled, and they didn't view it was worth very much. And this is a story you also find in, say, Beverly Farms, and you can find it probably in Gloucester, where you have these farmers who were offered sums by wealthy men to sell their lands, and they didn't think it was worth so much. But eventually they came around and they bought the land, the wealthy men did, from the farmers. And with the improvements of houses and landscaping, the land value certainly did increase from what those farmers didn't think was worth so much. And beautiful Singing Beach, here we have, it was known as Old Neck Beach. And this land on the shore, like I said, it wasn't worth so much, but when people came here to summer, it was worth very much. And you had beach cottages, what we call bathhouses on the shore. And you had people coming down to the beach to perhaps take in the musical sands, as newcomers found it, though it's up to interpretation whether it really sings a song or a squeak. Now, as for accommodations, well, one could perhaps have a private cottage, and it may be appropriate to use the quotation marks around cottage with the size of some of them. Or one could, if one did not have a private cottage of his own, stay at, say, a cottage hotel like Brownland on Old Neck Road. And this is a picture of the main house at Brownland. And of course, Manchester also did have a summer hotel that was a grand hotel, but I'm going to get to that a little later, the Masconomo House. Now, in addition to people coming from, say, Boston to come and summer in Manchester, which I'd say was the dominant demographic who was summering here in Manchester, you did have people from around the country coming to Manchester, the rich and famous, and even internationally, because Manchester, along with other areas in the shore, Beverly Farms, Magnolia, was host to many different summer embassies from many different countries. So you really had an international presence here, and they did move to different houses here. And of course, they were reported in the newspaper when they moved. But Manchester really was not just a domestic summer resort, but an international summer resort. And even could have been home to the Treaty of Manchester if things had gone differently in 1905. When the Russo-Japanese War was ending, Manchester was a candidate with its Grand Hotel Masconomo House for hosting peace negotiations. Unfortunately, the size wasn't quite large enough, and they ended up going with Wentworth by the Sea. Now, we had the Treaty of Portsmouth, but what if the Treaty of Manchester? I think that has a good sound to it. Or Manchester by the Sea, I should say. Now, here's a picture of the train station here in Manchester. This one was the one built in 1896. Unfortunately, it no longer looks like that today. Though, fortunately, Manchester still does have its train station, though train service has declined since the summer resort era ended. Manchester is still fortunate to have a stop on the commuter rail today. But Manchester at its height had 3 different train stations catering to the summer resort era. Near beaches, hotels, places to go for either the domestic servants working on the estates or the residents themselves. So there was Manchester Depot at the center of the village. There was West Manchester Station, which was on Harbor Street overlooking Black Cove, a very scenic location there. Unfortunately, the building no longer exists. And then, sort of nestled in the woods on the shore, was the Magnolia Station. If you go up Magnolia Avenue, at the end of the streets, where nowadays there's that bridge that goes over that wooden bridge, and there's really nothing else there, once was this station. And as you can see, there's some carriages, including a very fine motor car, waiting for an occupant, perhaps getting off that train coming in the distance. Now, of course, the summer resort era was not isolated to Manchester. I mean, this was something in this area that went back to the 1820s at Nahant, with the Nahant Hotel and Colonel Thomas H. Perkins. And eventually it came up the coast, and as the areas more southern to Manchester were occupied, people went further and further, and the train took them up to the coast here. And at Beverly Farms, you found it. At Manchester, you found it. And at Magnolia. Magnolia was sort of the epicenter, but Manchester was where the Magnolia Station actually was. So there is a little bit of overlap. And actually, if you go over to the museum, you'll find we have a pretty robust collection of Magnolia postcards. And I'm introducing Magnolia here now because, fortunately, though Corey Cooker wasn't able to be here tonight, we do have his presence in the form of his timeline, Cape Ann videos. And I'm going to present to you the next one on Magnolia on Lexington Avenue, which in its heyday was known as quite the fashion center. And now I present to you Mr. Corey Cooper.
I'm Corey Cooper for 1623 Studios, and this is a story of Magnolia's Lexington Avenue. A fishing and farming village once known as Kettle Cove, Magnolia, just a carriage ride from Boston, bloomed in the late 1800s as a coastal getaway for artists, writers, and statesmen. As rich and famous names found the village, grand hotels were built, turning Magnolia into a true summer resort by the dawn of the 20th century. In its heyday, Magnolia attracted Presidents Taft and Roosevelt, General MacArthur, and celebrities from Louisa May Alcott to Lucille Ball. The heart of Magnolia was Lexington Avenue, its arcade facade on one side and opulent Colonnade Mall on the other, boasting worldly shops that rivaled Saks Fifth Avenue. Tiffany's and FAO Schwartz were fixtures, as were lush tea gardens and boutiques of fine china, silver, and furs. It was known as Robbers Row, the site of countless capers, including a fearless $100,000 jewelry heist that remains unsolved. But the crown jewel of Magnolia was the massive Oceanside Hotel. Built in 1880, the Oceanside was a sprawling 6 stories tall, with sidekick cottages and bathing pavilion at nearby Hudson Beach. It was the largest wooden structure in the Northeast and largest hotel east of the Mississippi, housing up to 3,000 guests a night. It had its own casino, library, and beauty shops, generated its own electricity, made its own ice, and burned 6 tons of coal a day. John Barrymore performed in the theater. John Philip Sousa and the Marine Corps band played the ballroom. For a time, Magnolia was a star on the map. But the rise of the automobile and interstate highways, coupled with the Great Depression, led to a steep decline in tourism. After World War II, Magnolia got quiet. Then, on December 11, 1958, with the hotel closed for the season, a kitchen fire quietly spread undetected. The building became engulfed and raged through the night. By daybreak, the Oceanside and its properties were leveled. Hardly anything was salvaged. The majestic hotel and Magnolia's identity went up in smoke. Today, Magnolia is still a draw for the curious and creative. Incredibly, fires in 1991 and 2002 razed shops and condos where the Oceanside once stood. But time and time again, Magnolia rallies, rebuilds, and returns to Lexington Avenue.
Now, Magnolia was noted for its great hotels, from the Hesperus House of Benjamin Ware to the Oceanside, and its history of those hotels. But Manchester had its own grand hotel, the Masconomo House. And there's a picture of it looking towards from the beach side, and it had a great lawn with it had a windmill, it had tennis courts. On the other side, it had a dance hall. Quite a resort it was. And it originated not actually as a resort, the core part of it wasn't. It was actually a private cottage. If you look on this picture, you'll see on the right, there's a house that looks a little different than the rest of it. There you see that, Mr. Smith, you'll recognize this expression. It's the Booth Cottage, the original cottage of Junius Booth and his wife Agnes. And they came here after the Civil War to summer, as it was such a beautiful place. And there were other actors here. Joseph Proctor was another actor summering here. And now Mr. Booth, Junius Booth, he had managed the Boston Theater. And he decided to have, at his summer house, a hotel built on the side of his house. And it opened in 1878, and it attracted people for the season. It attracted people even for actually a show, because the first prominent production of Shakespeare was hosted in 1887 at the Masconomo House. Unfortunately, by then, Mr. Booth was no longer with us. Mrs. Booth had remarried to a theater manager, John Schoeffel, and Agnes Booth Schoeffel, she was acting in that production of As You Like It, which was rumored to attract even Grover Cleveland, though I think that was just a rumor. Though the Masconomo House was not the only place to have As You Like It. They also had Midsummer Night's Dream at Masconomo House. So, being run by a theatrical family, Masconomo House was home to theatrical feats. Now, here's another view from the back side of the beautiful Masconomo House. And unfortunately, we have this picture up in the exhibits. Actually, all these pictures are up in the exhibits, so I really do welcome you to come over and look afterwards. Now, the Masconomo House opened from 1878 to 1919. After Mrs. Booth Schoeffel, she was passed away by that point. Unfortunately, had a fire in 1919, as many of those grand hotels were befallen by fire. And in 1920, most of it was razed, but not all of it, as you know, Mr. Smith. And now I am going to present to you again Mr. Corey Corcoran to speak a little bit more about the Booth family and the connection with the Masconomo Hotel and the summer resort era here. So I will now present Mr. Corey Corcoran, Timeline Cape Ann.
In the late 19th century, the era of grand summer hotels on Cape Ann, the Masconomo House in Manchester attracted statesmen, celebrities, and socialites. It was built by a Booth, the most esteemed name in American theater. Three Booth brothers emerged from their legendary father Junius's mountainous shadow. Junius Jr., who retired to the estate near Singing Beach. Edwin, who became America's most beloved actor. And the youngest and most infamous brother, John Wilkes. I'm Corey Kukru for 1623 Studios, and this is the house that Booth built. The story begins in England with Junius Sr., a world-renowned Shakespearean thespian in the early 1800s. His skill was matched only by his eccentricity. He performed in several languages, achieving royal accolades throughout Europe. But Booth's genius was outdone by his madness. A hopeless alcoholic, he was prone to wild delusions. He'd pull a gun or a knife on a best friend before coming to. Fellow actors fled when he became too violent. He often missed performances altogether. Booth bought a farm in Maryland and raised a large family. Work and money were never an issue. He toured cross-country to headlining fanfare. Walt Whitman wrote glowingly of Booth. Edgar Allan Poe and Sam Houston were close friends. A political power, he drunkenly wrote a threatening letter to his pal, President Andrew Jackson. The president brushed it off as a friendly joke. Through it all, Booth was tolerated for his talent. 3 of his children worked in theater. Each carried his father's traits: acting ability, alcoholism, and lunacy. Junius Booth Jr., known as June, acted but excelled at theater management. Edwin traveled with Sr., babysitting and sometimes standing in for him. John, known more for his looks and daring stunts, became a heartthrob. Prior to the Barrymores, the Booths were the preeminent stage family in America. As Edwin and Junius Sr. toured, June and John Wilkes followed the gold rush to California. Unlike the puritanical North, where acting was considered blasphemy, theater thrived in the Wild West. June managed venues in San Francisco and Sacramento. During this time, Junius Sr. died of liver disease on a Mississippi riverboat. The sublime Edwin took over. He performed Hamlet for 100 straight nights in New York City and rocketed to stardom. June moved east to manage Edwin's business. The 3 brothers appeared on stage together only once, just before the Civil War broke out, in a production of Julius Caesar. Not all was harmonious amongst the siblings, as tensions rose between the North and South. The Booth homestead resided in the border state of Maryland. While most Booths sided with the North, John Wilkes pledged his allegiance to the Confederacy. John's fanaticism grew. Instead of joining the Confederate Army, he spied for the Southern cause, knowing he'd accomplish more through the power of the Booth name. His plan to assassinate President Lincoln at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. was coldly calculated. Lincoln loved theater and often attended performances featuring the Booths. Incredibly, Lincoln asked to meet Edwin and John on separate occasions, but messengers who knew of John's politics purposely failed to deliver Lincoln's request. On the night of April 14, 1865, John Wilkes knew where to enter the Ford's Theater, when to bypass security, and how to escape. The assassination caused widespread panic. Northerners thought the recent surrender at Appomattox was a ruse. The manhunt for John Wilkes Booth ended 12 days later. Shattered and ashamed, Edwin was forced to leave the stage and go into hiding. June was in Cincinnati. A lynch mob, seeing the Booth name on playbills around the city, rushed June's hotel. He barely escaped. The family received thousands of death threats and were surveilled by police. June was jailed as authorities pored over non-incriminating letters between him and John. The Booth legacy was ruined. Neither Edwin nor June ever mentioned baby brother John by name again. A year passed before Edwin sheepishly returned to the stage. An adoring crowd showered their favorite actor with cheers and flowers. June moved to Massachusetts and ran the Boston Theater. He married his famous lead actress, Agnes Perry. They had 4 children in Somerton, Manchester, which had become a destination for playwrights and actors. Only 2 children reached adulthood, Sidney and Junius Booth III. June and Agnes built a home to entertain friends on 12 acres by Singing Beach. June retired and expanded the Booth Cottage into the Masconomo House, a 103-room hotel between downtown Manchester and the water's edge. The grounds boasted lawn tennis and bowling, an ice house and horse stables, a dance hall, a bandstand, and a signature windmill. A staff of 50 cared for the 3.5-story high building. It featured world-class dining and high-end plumbing. 4 trains from Boston brought visitors to Manchester each day. June's retirement, however, was short-lived. He died at the house of a liver ailment in 1883, and, wary of his family's dangerous habits, left the entire estate to Agnes. She married another theater manager, and together they ran the hotel with flying colors. The Masconomo House also staged the first outdoor theatrical production in the country's history, a rendition of Shakespeare's As You Like It in 1887. Agnes performed. In 1893, Edwin Booth passed away after establishing The Players, a private social club and museum for American theater in New York City. The Edwin Booth Life Achievement Award is still given. Recipients include Helen Hayes, Jack Lemmon, and Jason Robards. Agnes died in 1910 and was buried alongside June and 3 of their 4 children at Manchester's Rosedale Cemetery. Sadly, demons continue to haunt the Booths. Shortly after Agnes's passing, Junius III shot his wife, then stabbed himself to death in England. The Masconomo House stayed open until a fire in 1919. Artifacts from the hotel are on display at the Manchester Historical Museum. Today, it's a private residence featuring the original Booth Cottage. The property that once spilled into Singing Beach no longer has any attachment to the Booth family.
Now, while the house no longer has an attachment to the Booth family, we are very fortunate to have our special guest here, and I've been referencing him all evening, Mr. George Smith, who lives at the remaining part of the Masconomo house, the Booth Cottage, and he is here available to answer any questions you might have about living in the house. A round of applause.
Well, to give you a little more recent history, back when Shuffle sold to the Sullivans, at the start of the Depression, they started renting the field to the public. And the people on Smith's Point were very concerned about that. They said, there goes the neighborhood, because there was a possibility of that going commercial. And so 20 people on Smith's Point put up over $100,000. And they then, the Depression worsened, and they lost every penny they put in. However, they did sell off the cottages, and they also sold off the hotel. It was reduced by 3 hotel rooms, remaining 3 hotel rooms on 3.5 stories.
Could you speak
So,
closer to the mic?
let me adjust that. Yeah, much better. So they lost the money, but they claim they saved Smith's Point from commercial development. They sold all the cottages. The halls are still there. That same family held on. And our family. They sold the cottages okay. They couldn't sell the hotel and the adjoining Booth Cottage. And up came my father, who rented it for, my parents, who rented it for 2 summers during World War II, the war as it was called back then. And when I was 8 years old, they bought that in 1943, to see how old I am. Do the math. They hung on until the end of the war, 1945. But we had a great time. My sister Barbara Metcalf, who's still in Beverly Farms. We used to, on rainy days, we'd invite all our friends over, because although the first floor of the hotel, of the remainder of the hotel, was renovated, there were 2 stories of hotel rooms and another 4th floor, which was a kind of a half-story, storage rooms, all kinds of eaves and staircases and armoires to hide in. And we played kick the can or sardines in a can, all kinds of games on rainy days. But that ended with my end of World War II, 1945. My parents decided to buy it. Well, they had already bought it in 43, but they decided to renovate it. Well, they put $80,000 into that renovation. Of course, my grandfather was an architect, but he was way off on the cost of it. It was kind of tough. For that kind of money, they could have bought a house on the shoreline out of Smith's Point someplace in those days. But my grandfather, the architect, did a beautiful job putting a flat roof on, but with an eave all around the rest. A lot of architectural flourishes that were very successful. And so the Booth Cottage is relatively unchanged. There have been some changes, but the old hotel was transformed into just 2 stories instead of 3.5. Parents took off 2 floors. You can imagine what a job that was. And that was all renovated into bedrooms. And my 2 sisters and my parents got the ocean rooms. As little brother, I got the back room. But the old maid stairs that there was a maid's room in the back room there, was my room. And there was some back stairs. And my grandfather said, we'll make George happy. We'll put in a secret staircase with a trap door in the floor, extend the room out, and that was lots of fun. Any questions? Good. Well, yes.
How is it like living in an old hotel today?
Well, I moved back here. I retired here in 1994. I've been here 30 years now. And it's been occupied by family all that time. Various older nieces and nephews lived in the house. But the very summer that I retired, it became available. So our mother had given us the house back in the early 80s. My sisters were kind in the buyout, and we have loved it. One of the great moments of life is coming across those railroad tracks, hearing the first parish bell and the ding of the train coming, and occupying that house. And it's just marvelous.
How has Manchester changed in the time that you've lived here?
It's grown. Luckily, it's more filling in the empty spaces in the village. Of course, there have been a lot of them, but thanks to the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust, most of the part of the land on the other side of this side of 128 in Essex has been preserved. And the largest roadless area in Manchester, which is what we call the West Woods, south of 128 and bounded by Pine Street and the Essex and the Beverly Farms line. That's undeveloped. It's gone. Yeah.
George, did your parents sell the land that is now the Singing Beach Club?
No, the syndicate bought the beach club, the whole business back in about 1931. And as I said, they lost their money on the deal. But my parents they sold off the cottages. And my parents bought 3.5 acres down to the beach club. The beach club was built to carry the property during the Depression, which really was unsuccessful. But the beach club became very popular. And my parents sold off one lot. There was a rumor going around at that time that the town and the state were going to take that big field, open field, and make that into a parking lot. You know, I mean, that would ruin our spot there, everybody else around there. So the beach club let everything go up, all the trees go up. And my parents sold off one lot to the coins below us. And I don't know if that stopped the state or not, but it remains that way to this day.
Any other questions?
Good.
Okay, thank you all very much.